here's a request from one of our Studio Insider members. She says, I'm now struggling with how to work sky holes into foliage. Mine look like what they are, blobs of paint. Well, let's do some sky holes. Well, if you've been watching my quick tips, you know the script. And when someone requests how to do something, I want to show you how to approach it, how to look for it, and how to make decisions about how to do it. Because I can show you, okay, this is the way you do sky holes, but that's not going to inform you about any sky hole that you might see through foliage. And this is what we're talking about. They used to call those places for birds to sit, but that's got kind of old. Anyway, so I've got a photo here. I could have gotten any kind of photo. Happens to be some oaks. And we can see sky through this foliage, and that's what we're talking about here. Now, observe when you're looking at something like this, don't just look for foliage, but switch your attention to the shape of the actual hole, the sky. Switch your attention to that shape. A lot of times when people are trying to figure out how to do something, they're looking in the wrong place. So part of painting or responding to our reference is knowing how to look or what to look for. So we have to switch our attention an awful lot. When you look for that shape, when you look for the shape itself, describe to yourself what you're seeing. You're seeing a shape that has edges, but if you look really, really close, and if you look through almost every sky hole you'll see through foliage, they're ragged edges. They're not smooth edges. And oftentimes we'll see twigs and limbs that are moving through those holes. So I'm going to do just enough here. I'm not going to do the whole tree, don't have time for that. But I'm going to do just enough here to give you some clues about how you might handle it, kind of show you the process of thinking. So what do we need? Well, we need some sky and we need some foliage. So let's see, where do we start? Well, I'm going to just sort of outline, just a little, not outline, give a little bit of placement here, kind of indicate where that foliage is. And I'll just reach into my dark green here. And someone's going to ask me, what green are you using? Try sap green, that works real good. Daniel Smith's brand of sap green works better. And there's a mixture that you can make, but let's don't go there now. Let's just keep it simple. All right, so what do we got here? We've got the shape of the tree on the outside. I've got the shape of the foliage on the outside. And you see foliage, the foliage of trees is ragged. It's got texture on the edges. Look for that texture on the edges. It's never, well, I'm not going to say never, because you get someone with a pruning shears and come by and make a kind of a ball out of it. That usually is not the kind of thing we want to paint anyway. But anyway, so we're looking at the character, where that the direction in which those are turned, how they're tapering on the ends. We look for all those things. We're not just calling it tree, but we're looking for those shapes of the edges and how those edges are turning whenever we're doing anything. And when we're doing foliage, that's especially important. Now, we're seeing these groups of foliage here, where the limbs are poking their foliage out into the sky or out into space, and then we see the darker places where we're moving inside. So we can begin to sort of indicate that, something like that. This is what I'm talking about right here, and so on and so on. Now, I don't need to do much more of that to, I just kind of do something. Don't need to do much more of that to show you what I call preliminary drawing. That preliminary drawing doesn't mean you place an outline. It means that you're exploring the edges and the shape, the edges of the shape, and the general placement of that on your canvas. So there's the first thing. Now, I like to build the sky and the tree together. People talk about what you put in first. Well, I like to build them together because they are together here. So there are times when there's lots and lots of sky when I might build the whole thing, but in this case I think build them together. Now what we need here on the outside for sky, I need to show you just enough to indicate sky. So I'm not going to do the whole thing. And so what are we seeing here in the way we're seeing that the sky is a little lighter here. It's getting a little darker as it goes there. So what I'll do is go right into I've got this mixture here that I made using ultramarine blue and the Rembrandt Viridian. I found those combinations to be wonderful to work with for creating those variations we find in the sky. So I'll just start with that. I'm going to put just a little bit of this red violet in there to sort of knock down the intensity of that. Now let's just start placing. So we start placing now, just to indicate sky. So just place a little bit, just enough here for you to get the sense of sky. And as I'm saying, the purpose of this is not to demonstrate how to paint sky, but it's to place enough here for you to see. Now, if the sky hole, let's get to just a little bit better gradated right in here. You get just a little bit more going right up in here. I like to go back and forth between red, violet, and the blue because we do see a lot of violet in the sky. Maybe not here, but that's too much. So, and the value is a little bit lighter than that. There we go. There's something like that. And place just enough here to indicate sky. That's probably enough for this quick tip. After all, it is supposed to be a quick tip. All right. Now, if the sky, if there's enough of sky coming through, the shape is distinctive enough, I can go ahead and place that now. And I need to look at the pattern of that. I'm seeing this shape right here, and what is that shape? There's something else I need to do. I need to make it just a little bit darker than the sky I'm seeing here, because it may not look darker here, and it may not feel darker or look darker when you actually look through it, but it really is. What's happening is that when all that foliage closes in around that opening, it's closing out part of the light as well. And so in reality, we're not seeing, or as far as how we communicate it in our painting, we're not seeing that as light as we think we are. So just a little tiny bit darker, and then we might need to adjust it even more. So let me just make that here. So it's coming down right in here, and watch the shape. The shape, it's a kind of a ragged shape. The shape kind of does that. Pay attention to the shape. And it has a little dip in it, and it kind of comes like that. You can let the brush create the shape for you. We see other shapes too. We see a shape right here, and that shape is positioned about at this angle. That's important. It's positioned at about this angle. That would be, if you were looking at the clock, about a 7 o'clock angle, and it turns this way and has a little point on the end. And another point right here, and kind of tapers off right here. And then we see another shape, and we keep building where we see those larger shapes. We keep building those to place them as we are building this particular part of the sky. So now, that's all I'm going to do, just that much for right now. Then I'm going to show you, I said I like to build the sky, and when I have a big tree like that, I like to build them together. So I'll go in now and begin to build, and I'm looking here at where I'm seeing that sky. I'm seeing shadow, dark shadow in the tree. So I'll go into the shadow portion of that color and pull just a little bit over there. It's not quite that dark, and I'm going to knock that down just a little bit with a little bit of this to create the feeling of shadow more. A little bit of the red violet into the yellow green, and a little bit of ultramarine blue of the sky itself. And let's see now. Okay, what am I doing? I'm shaping this darker than this part right here. I'm shaping this darker shadow portion right around that. And so I'm going to let the brush, because that edge of sky hole is ragged, I'm going to let the brush be sort of ragged, see, as it places around that. And I'm paying attention to that shape of shadow. Shape of that shadow portion of that particular bough. And you'll see that shadow moves on up. It actually moves, the shadow portion of it actually moves into the sky like that. And then I'm going to, I'm seeing that on both sides of the sky hole. That's the kind of observation that you need to make, close, sensitive observation to the shapes you're dealing with. And so I'm seeing there's shadow above it too. Usually, I'm not going to make rules about this, but look for whether what you're seeing through is through the shadow portions of that foliage, or for where it's not in shadow, where the light's hitting it. That's important. So almost got a feeling of sky hole around this particular portion right here. And I could keep bringing it down. I'm looking, in fact, I'm thinking almost all those sky holes I'm seeing right here, I'm seeing through the shadow portion of the tree. So it's that kind of observation that's going to enable you to get this stuff. Now, and so that's probably enough of that. So I'll build just enough light where the tree begins to go in, where the foliage begins to go in light. I'll build just enough of that. It's not a very bright light. It's kind of a low light, not indirect sunlight. And let's kind of knock that down. Build a little bit of that. Now extend it away from the sky hole into the sky, sort of like this. And then if I want that to catch a little bit of that light on the edge, I'll grab a little bit on the end of the brush like that. Catch just a little bit of that light, kind of, sort of interpreting what I'm seeing up there. A little bit. And then I will be repeating that pattern as I move throughout. Now, let's get just enough here. Just enough there so that you can begin to see that working. And let's build that right here. Now, what about those little incidental tiny spots of light that come through? Little pieces of light that come through that are not the obvious shapes of holes that we find. Well, I'll go to a smaller brush and I'll just, and usually it's a good idea to build the whole tree, all the sky around the tree, build the whole thing with the major sky holes, the larger ones, build those in as you go. It makes it a little easier for you if you do that, rather than to build a whole tree and go plop blue paint on top of that. That's why you get, one reason why you get blobs. But anyway, so suppose, so what are we going to do about those little incidentals? Oh, we'll do that right here. We can, again, we want to go into the sky color. And I'm going to make that sky color a little bit darker, just a tiny bit darker than I'm seeing it here. And one way to do that is just to put it on your brush and compare it. It only needs to be, well, you can gauge that by the feeling of the whole thing, but it only needs to be just a shade, half a value darker. Okay, so now to get those little incidentals, I can just do something like that, just sort of place them. With a scumble, scumble means that the paint is sliding on top. Wet paint from the brush, sliding on the wet paint from the canvas, and so just holding the brush down and barely touching it, and sometimes just sort of rolling it a little bit, being sure that it goes in some sort of little pattern. Then that can give you those little incidentals. So let's see, let me kind of close in the light there just a little bit, just to make that make a little bit more sense. And one more thing, and that is, once you have your sky holes placed, look at what you're seeing go through those sky holes. We see right here, if we were there, we'd see that much better. If we were right here and here, we see a limb or two, maybe some twigs going through there. And so that's what we need to do next. Now, to that, I'm going to bring this, it looks like they're very, very dark, but they wouldn't be quite so dark. So I'm just going to bring some green and the red violet over here. Let's put just a little bit more of that green in there, like that. That creates a gray. A little bit more of the green. Those two, yellow, green, and red violet, are, whenever you're doing landscape, you're doing grass or foliage or stuff like that, it's a good idea to have the yellow green on the palette and the red violet in order to be able to neutralize when you need to, and also a line of blue where you can cool if you want to, and then some yellow up here to warm if you want to. But that's a little side. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is, let's do this. go up here and reach for a little white, and see how neutral that is? That is almost too neutral. Now what I want there is about, I want it just to be slightly darker than the sky. So I'll gradually pull this in. This is for those twigs, and I think maybe let that be just a little bit warmer. Okay, now, can we see slightly darker than the sky? All right. Well, I'm going to get that still. So, yeah, it's being or there we go. That's probably good enough. Being aware of the color that you use for this is important, because the color should be consistent with whatever you use for the trunk. So, and the value usually when we see small limbs and twigs sticking out in the sky in the light, even though in local color they might be very dark, they're catching light, and the camera might pick them up dark like this, but take a closer look. Unless they're in really deep shadow, we don't show them quite so dark as we see them. We should try to compensate for the light. Now let's see what happens here. Now, so I can just kind of stroke, there we go, stroke a limb or two, maybe a couple of twigs through that, and stroke another one there. Now I'm beginning to feel sky holes, and so on. So I think if you'll practice these steps of observation, of careful forming of edges, careful but make them look spontaneous, paying attention to the character of the edges of those sky holes, not just the fact that it's sky hole, and then pay attention to the values you're using, the values of the sky, and whether the areas of sky holes are in shadow and not in shadow. If you, after some practice of that observation, I think you'd be very happy with your sky holes. Be sure and view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell, so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianeMize.com, where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.